go to the like, oh, but he did a great job. Yeah. So the first one. Yeah.
They do. Have it memorized. Oh, good. Hey. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Hi, folks. I'm Sasha Spector, Program Director for Environment here at Doris Duke Foundation, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all to this afternoon's session. I want to welcome you to the Doris Duke Center, which for Climate Week is, as you can see, branded and recreated as the Treehouse, a place where climate and nature conversations can thrive. And for us, I think we know not just because we're everyone in New York is sort of obsessed with real estate, but that place really matters, and where you can get together in the midst of the Climate Week circus is really important. A little bit of housekeeping. We also are really keyed into place because we have two other places across the country. One in central New Jersey, Duke Farms, which I hope you'll all visit, and one which I really hope you'll visit in Hawaii at Shangri-La on the island of Oahu. And so both of those places were left to us by Doris Duke, in addition to her estate when the foundation was created. And as a result, we understand how important it is to be able to get together and in a place that inspires or protects you from all of the swirl. But it also makes us really conscious of the people who were here before and are here still today. So we'd like to acknowledge that we operate on the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Canarsie, Kanaka Maoli, Lenni Lenape, Manhattan, Matinecock, Mohican, Montaukett, Munsee, Lenape, Setauket, Shinnecock, and Unchakog homelands across our locations in Honolulu, Hawaii, and what are known today as Hillsborough, New Jersey, and New York, New York. So the Treehouse is also a place for us to help propel our Climate Smart Forest Initiative, which is aimed at catalyzing a transformative national effort to activate the tree and forest sector in order to meet ambitious mid-century climate and conservation goals. That for us means protecting large amounts of forest that would be lost to development. It means restoring enormous amounts of forest to the landscape where they once were, 100 million acres or more. And it means shifting the way that we protect, restore, and manage lands to a climate-informed and climate-smart, future-proofed or future-resilient approach. So this place helps us bring together conversations that are part of that, and certainly help us all come together. And I love the Ashes to Action as first it's a better alternative than Ashes to Ashes. Yeah, but because I do think that in fact catastrophe, like especially catastrophic wildfire, but other catastrophes in the climate space are portals to alternate potential futures. In fact, it could be ashes to ashes, or it could be ashes to action. And one of the greatest challenges, both in terms of avoiding these catastrophes, making our forests and our communities more resilient, is being ready to know what the actions are once you've arrived at that catastrophic moment. In the post-catastrophe, there's an incredible tension, and this doesn't matter whether you're talking about floods, fires, hurricane damages, there's a moment of a window of opportunity to get it right for a different future, or an incredible impulse to snap back to the way things were. That urgency has to be balanced with the urgency of a long future that is not like the long past. And so today's session is a really important opportunity to dig into that moment and the ways that we can begin to prepare for that long, resilient future on landscapes that are undergoing dramatic shifts. Our forests are being forced to change faster, maybe than they have since the Miocene, right? So that's 3 million years ago. And that includes the shifts, the pace of change through the ice ages. And so the forests are changing as faster than they can change. And as a result, they're jumping forward in punctuated moments like this. And our response to managing the policies, the politics, the economics, and the technologies with nature and where it's going is the challenge in front of us. So this afternoon's panel is an amazing opportunity to really to dig into that, to hear from a number of leaders who are driving this paradigmatic shift, technological shift, and financial shift in order to create a really different outcome for these important parts of our landscape that are under transition. So with that, I hope you guys have a great conversation, and I won't be able to stay for the whole thing, but I know it's going to be awesome, and thanks for everyone for coming this afternoon. Thanks.
Okay, well, I have the honor of leading off here. Brian Kittler. I am the Chief Program Officer for the Resilient Forest Program at American Forests. We do a lot of work on post-fire restoration, so we are all about going from ashes to action. And just want to provide some context here. We want to focus on the concept of innovation within the post-fire planning framework that we go through. With the end outcome being, we got to move faster, we got to move bigger and braver in how we're approaching these post-fire restoration challenges. And the challenges are significant. So the map here shows all mega fires from 2000 to 2022. And I want to highlight, out of all that land that was burned, we had a lot of land that burned with beneficial ecological effects. We want more of that type of fire activity. But we did have, in a 5-year period from 2018 to 2023, 2.75 million acres of reforestation need that was generated by stand replacing high severity fire, right? That was set up through decades of decisions, through decades of climate change, all kinds of reasons why that happened. And now we're faced with the challenge of what do we do about it? So we think what we do about it is we move quickly and with science-based backing to regenerate healthy, resilient forests, right? And the cost of not doing that are significant costs. Delayed regeneration, permanent deforestation. There are landscapes that are in transition. We know that this is happening. Elevated risk of high severity rebirths, right? So we want to avoid going from ashes to ashes, right? We want to disrupt that cycle and get back to a resilient forest so that when the next fire comes, it will burn in a way that has beneficial ecological effects. So returning a forest is really important. Declining water values, carbon storage, reduced adaptation within our landscapes, right? We like to think that high severity fire is an opportunity actually to help the forest become more adapted to the future climate, to think about things like assisted migration. Increased costs, that is a biggie. The longer we wait, the more expensive it gets to act and regenerate a forest. And of course, impacts to rural communities, very significant. So at American Forest, we used to just plant trees. We used to just be an intermediary working with our donors and with land managers to send money to the ground. We've really evolved our approach to think more holistically about the entire supply chain of activities and investments and infrastructure and people that's really needed to get to scale, to grow to the scale and respond to the challenges of, for instance, 2.75 million acres that burned in a 5-year period at high severity, right? So we think about this whole pipeline of activities, starting with partnerships, ending with maintenance and monitoring, and everything that has to come in between related to having the infrastructure, the key inputs like seed and seedlings and people that are really needed to regenerate these healthy forests. And that second part of that pipeline of resilience planning, that's what we're here to talk about today. So thinking about the resilience of our landscapes. So at American Forests, with that evolved approach, this is what it looks like for us. We're doing all of that work along that supply chain all over the West Coast, in the interior, and lots of other parts of the country. And one thing that I take away from this resilience planning piece of this, you got to do this work at scale to understand where are those constraints in the pipeline? Where would you prioritize? Where do we need to invest? How are we going to get to scale? So we've learned some good things by doing that work. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Libby, who's led us through that journey.
Hey folks, my name is Libby Pansing. I'm the Senior Director of Forest and Restoration Science at American Forests. And following up on what Brian said, oh, apparently if I move that at all, it makes noises. We're going to talk a little bit about the resilience planning that we've done at American Forests. I have had the pleasure of being involved in post-fire reforestation planning for about a little over almost 5 years now at American Forests. And, you know, this is really what we're looking at when we talk about post-fire planning, right? This is the 2021 bootleg fire. The largest high severity patch of forest fire that happened in this particular landscape was, depending upon how you estimate it, anywhere between 60 and 90,000 acres, right? That's 1.5 times the size of DC. There are no live trees, right? Like, this is the reality of what we're dealing with. And honestly, Sasha, can you just come back up and restate everything that you said at the beginning? Because that would be amazing, right? This is our opportunity to set these landscapes up for success in the future. This is our opportunity to adapt them to climate change. This is our opportunity to reforest these locations for resilience, for sustainability, and for the future. Right. And so that's what we're really trying to set people up for success with when we talk about this resilience planning and this reforestation planning within that post-fire concept. So we've had the opportunity to do this across a bunch of different landscapes at this point, and I want to highlight 2 different examples, and not only how that is helping to set us up for future success, but also how it is resulting in an increase to the pace and the scale of reforestation that is occurring on the landscape right now. So the first one that I'll talk about stems off of that picture of the 2021 bootleg fire. So about 1.5 years ago, we released an integrated post-fire resiliency strategy for the South Central Oregon region. It included about 650,000 acres of burned landscapes. Does this have a thing? I don't, yeah, maybe? No. Okay, so the big one on the left is the bootleg fire. And then we've got about 4 or 5 other fires that burned anywhere between 2018 and 2021. What we did in this landscape is we actually brought together a suite of different folks to the table to come up with a collaborative approach to not only post-fire reforestation, but to fuel management and really trying to set that landscape up for future resiliency. The outcome was actually pretty spectacular because across the private landowners, the private timber industries, the Forest Service, community connected partners, water partners, all of these folks that we brought to the table, we really found consensus among how to move forward. And that was essentially looking at this landscape, trying to figure out what kinds of activities we would like to do across that landscape. So categorizing that landscape, prioritizing it, and really the whole purpose of this was to set it up so that we could reintroduce prescribed fire and that we could actually get that pre-fire management piece back on the table, right? Because these post-fire landscapes are our future pre-fire landscapes. So in this, you can see this light red color is about 254,000 acres of need across this landscape that we identified as probably requiring post-fire reforestation and artificial planting because we didn't think it is likely to regenerate on its own. So it's not a small need. What we did, I said we kind of targeted this so that we could actually look at implementation, or that we could actually move towards reintroducing prescribed fire. So what we worked with the Forest Service to do is identify implementation units on National Forest Service land that are about the size of the broadcast burn units for the forest. And the intention was to go and do the reforestation, do the fuels management, do all of the work that we needed to do to successfully reintroduce that prescribed fire so that we could start to create these resilient forests, start to understand how to maintain these forests as sustainable for the long term. What this has turned into since is we actually have a group of folks that are working with the Forest Service to do layout, to do implementation, post-fire regeneration surveys, and we've done cone collection. We've partnered with the Forest Service to identify all of these different needs and actually start tackling some of that post-fire reforestation need. We've also partnered with entities like Collins Pine and Green Diamond. We have a master stewardship agreement with them to, or the Forest Service has a master stewardship agreement with them to start moving that reforestation work forward. So we're starting to see increases in collaboration from the implementation side, and all of that was really generated from the development of this post-fire reforestation strategy. The second one that I'll mention briefly is we just finished one for Northern Colorado. So these two larger fire perimeters on the right-hand side here, the one in the south is the East Troublesome Fire. The one on the top is the Cameron Peak. Those both burned in 2020 and represent the two largest forest fires in recorded Colorado history. So we've worked with a lot of different agencies, entities, community-connected partners to develop this. It's brand new out. But one thing that I do want to highlight again is that we have moved from this space of planning into implementation. And so these plans are directly setting up the space for us to move into that next phase of implementation and seeing the pace and scale of reforestation increase. Those processes take a really long time, right? So most of these have taken anywhere from like 1.5 years to 2 years to complete. And so what we're looking forward to doing, to Brian's point earlier, of trying to increase the pace and scale, but also recognizing, and Sasha's point earlier, of trying to recognize that reforestation needs to happen quickly and that it really needs to happen at a an increased clip, is that we have the tools and the technology to be able to do a lot of this in an automated fashion. And so the dream right now is that we can get to a space where we have an holistic reforestation planning tool that takes us from that initial assessment to categorizing the landscape, through climate assessments, through capacity assessments, prioritization, implementation planning, and monitoring. And really that gets us that whole cycle of the post-fire reforestation plan so that we can get that work done and we can get it done quickly. Without that, one piece of that is inevitably going to drop out, and we're going to get to a space where one piece of that is missing. What we've been working on with Planscape for the last little bit, that Jordan will talk about in just a second, is kind of a version 1.0 of this. And so where we're aiming is, for now, we have a National Forest System land prototype that Jordan will talk about. But we're aiming towards trying to get working groups that can bring together the users and the research, the assessments, and then do that reforestation categorization so we at least have that first part going. We had one wish: speed up the pace and scale of reforestation to adapt future forests to climate change. And I want to come back to this in just a second. Right now, again, 1.5 years, 2 years, if we can get this process locked down, we can go from that entire period down to a point where we can do this and at least get that implementation work started quickly within 10 minutes to a half an hour, right? We're talking about significantly decreasing the amount of time that we need to get from point A to point B. So really looking forward to kind of having more conversations collectively about how we get there, and I'll turn it over to Rob and Jordan.
Great, thank you, Libby. Okay, good. I am Rob. I work on the Planscape platform in a partnerships role, and we have some spare chairs down here. So the people standing at the back probably are starting to regret standing at the back. Please do come down. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 chairs here. So please help yourselves. So let me start with some thanks. First of all, thank you to Sasha. Thank you to the team. Anybody booking a hotel room this week knows that New York space is expensive. The fact that you open up your home to us and facilitate these things is wonderful. The team, like we've put on events where you have to do the badges yourself and you have to figure out the AV and you know, having all this lockdown is super generous. So thank you. Thank you to this group of people. Like, so these are some of the smartest, most knowledgeable, most caring, most generous with their time people I've met in this space. And so the fact that everybody's willing to be here, thank you to you. Climate Week is hectic. The fact that you've sort of, and we've all got day jobs, the fact that you're all here, you know, I appreciate. So let's jump in. So Planscape, and Libby sort of teed up, and Libby and Brian teed up the problem well. We're going to start to sort of talk about sort of possible solutions here. So Planscape is a wildfire resilience planning platform. What does that mean? It means it's software, but it lives in a web app. So you go to a website, and you can, as a user of this, can plan across a landscape. You can say, here's an area that I'm interested in. I care about building wildfire resilience. You can enter a whole bunch of things that you are important to you, some goals, some constraints, etc. And it will sort of suggest to you where you should best put treatments on the landscape to achieve the goals that you've set. It'll give you a whole bunch of analysis around why those areas are chosen and how you can kind of think through the decisions. You can model out prescriptions. I'm going to do some prescribed burn here. I'm going to do some thinning over here. I'm going to do some sequence treatments. It'll tell you how the vegetation will change over a 20-year time horizon and how that will impact a whole range of metrics that you might care about, to give you the information. So it ingests a whole bunch of data, a whole bunch of science, makes that available through a web browser. It is free to use. We are open science, open source. We're trying to democratize the data, democratize the best science, make it publicly available so anybody can come and do this work. You don't need to have access to the right scientists or the right labs to do this. It's all freely available. We do that through a structure called a software collaborative, a fairly unique structure that exists to help entities come together, different government agencies, federal, states, tribal, public, private, coming together to collaborate because we all care about the solution. We don't want to do the work multiple times. So it is governed by a group of people, you know, logos on this slide and others. It is funded by them through grant funding. So we have, you know, millions of dollars in Forest Service funding, philanthropic funding, so on and so forth. Other people bring resources. You know, Indian Land Tenure Foundation bring tribal sort of data sets and access to tribal communities. So we understand those user groups. So different people collaborating in different ways. It is used collaboratively as well. So, you know, the typical user of Planscape is a group, maybe thinking about a landscape. Maybe they are a watershed-based group. Maybe they're an RCD. There's often a tribal component there. There's probably some sort of federal landowners, BLM, Forest Service, state, you know, private, coming together because they care about wildfire resilience across a broader landscape. This is a snapshot of some California users. The platform is now available CONUS-wide. So we think about these sort of groups of people coming together in software to make these complex planning, land management decisions and try and give them tools to help them trade off the various things they care about. We're very focused on users in terms of driving user need. One of the things that we found about a year ago was users saying, well, this is all well and good planning for pre-fire, for resilience, but I've got 500,000 acres over here that's burned. What do I do with that? Like, how do I think about managing that? That's new to lots of people. We've got these big footprints of catastrophic fires. And so we've been sort of working with American Forests for the last X sort of months here in sort of teeing up what that solution could be. How can we help those people? And I am going to pass over, more than that, I'm going to pass to my colleague Jordan, who has been naughty, so he has to sit at the back. And he is going to talk us through the prototype for the module.
Excellent. All right, so my name is Jordan Combs. I'm a product manager with Spatial Informatics Group, working on Planscape. So I'm going to show you a prototype or a demo of what we've worked with American Forest and with Libby to try to continue and work towards this initiative. So if you were to log into Planscape today, as Rob said, you would be taken to your homepage, which is going to be a list of planning areas. a planning area, and Planscape is just your outermost boundary for planning. And so Planscape is designed to be highly collaborative, so you can see any planning areas that you yourself have drawn or uploaded if you upload a shapefile, or you can see planning areas that have been shared with you. So if we're using this as an example, if I've logged into Planscape, then Rob has shared his planning area with me, this post-fire planning area. So if I click into here, I'm going to be taken to a planning area homepage. So everything, this kind of large section here on the right side, you can see there's just one scenario in there. But the idea with this is to allow people to be able to determine where to treat and where to treat first based on their objectives. And so Rob showed outputs that come out of that. Creates project areas and tells you and prioritizes those for you. But as we've had conversations with users, we know that that land management is more than just planting fuel treatments. And so in talking about this, how can we help to accelerate this reforestation work? And so working with Libby and American Forest, we have come up with a demo or a prototype for this post-fire reforestation assessment. So you can see up here in this top left, we have our planning area analytics tools. So beyond just being able to generate those project areas, I can go into here and I can use additional tools that will allow me to do more within landscape planning. So if I click in here, nice post-fire reforestation assessment homepage. I'm going to, oh, and you can see here, this on this bottom left, this is the hypothetical planning area that I'm working within. So I'm going to start my analysis, give it a great name, hit save. So the first thing that you're taken to is availability. And so this is saying, if this is my planning area, based on the work that I'm doing, where am I allowed to treat? What are the lands that I'm responsible for? So if I hit select here, you can obviously go forward and select all if you're needing to do reforestation or treatment activities on all of them. In this example, we are going to select U.S. Forest Service lands. So if I select that, have a nice pop over here on the left. If you want to be able to view where are the U.S. Forest Service lands within my planning area so you can get context for where you're actually looking to do reforestation activities, you can click that. So I'm going to hit save and continue here. The next thing I'm going to select is my fire, or what fires am I wanting to do this post-fire reforestation on. So I can filter fires. In this example, I'm using between 2010 and 2020, but if you want to filter that down, you can see what fires have burned, and you'll be able to see the burn scar for those fires within your planning area. In this example, I'm going to go Coal Creek, Long Draw, Devil Creek, and I can see down here in the bottom right, I get a nice little pop-up that tells me the fire name, what's the fire year, how many acres were burned, so I can get an idea of what I'm looking, or how much acreage I'm looking to treat here. Save and continue. I get a nice little review of that. Gives me a sense of how much I'm actually looking to treat. And so I'm going to confirm and continue. Next, we have some reforestation category settings. So I can set my dispersal distance setting. So we have a couple of default settings in here. I think in the future we can look at allowing people to customize this a little bit more, but just for the sake of the prototype, we're using defaults of 197 feet. If I want to, I can update this to 492. And then I also have options for my burn severity index. So if I want to use RBR, I can hit this and set those reforestation category settings. So now I'm going to hit finish, get a nice little pop-up message, close. While my analysis is running, get a nice little status here that says that it's running. How exciting, it's done. I'm going to go into here. And so this is going to be the your initial outputs page. So in talking about this post-fire reforestation assessment, we were talking with Libby and trying to decide, okay, what if we want to start here, what's the barrier for people getting into planning and the actual implementation of this? And so we wanted to develop something that allowed people to take what comes out of Planscape and go directly into, so that they can then begin planning and implementing. So you can see here, this is our fire. This is where we are doing our planning activities based on where we're allowed to treat and the fires that we're treating. It's going to assign these out into these reforestation categories. So we have natural regeneration, natural recovery, plant. I can hover over one of these, get some information. So I know that this reforestation zone, it's in the Devil Creek fire. How much is the acreage? I can actually download this directly. So this would download a geo package. So it would include a shapefile and then tabular data that could actually be uploaded directly into FACS. And so somebody could go directly into implementation and planning from this application. But then the idea is that they can take this information, and down here on the left, we have this start implementation planning. You could actually take that, go further into it, and you would be able to start to prioritize and build those units based on whatever your user or whatever the user's objectives or goals were for those reforestation activities. And Libby, anything you'd add there?
Questions about methodology, go find me after.
Thanks, Jordan. Can we
Yes.
get back to the slides? And we are planning a good sort of 30 minutes of sort of Q&A and discussion at the end, and some time left to mingle and chat amongst each other. So keep questions. We'll be getting it to the end. Good. So hopefully I'm not going to read all the words on this slide, but we're focused on pace and scale, as Libby said. We're taking a very rigorous scientific process that Libby and team go through in months, in years. It takes a long time. We're going to distill that down to software. This is software that's good for this, so we can kind of automate this. We can make it fast. We can get impact on the land quickly, which is really what we care about. My one wish. Who here has got a phone with them? Hands up. Okay, my wish is that you care about this space and you take a snap of that QR code and send me an email and say you want to help. We are looking for collaborators. We are Planscape, American Forest. We've been working on this for 6 or 9 months. We're naturally collaborative. We like more people in the room. We like a bigger tent. We like more voices. We like more resources. We want grant funding to continue this work and see it through to sort of reality. So we would love engagement. We would love interaction. I appreciate you. See phones up. And I am going to pass over to Ciara.
All right. So, hi everyone. I'm Sierra Huvis. I'm a data scientist at the Nature Conservancy, which means essentially I'm an ecologist who can code by Nature Conservancy standards. And I'm here today to zoom out a little bit when it comes to reforestation tools and talk about the Reforestation Hub. If some, raise your hand if you've heard of the Reforestation Hub. Okay, and some exciting new updates we're doing, as well as how we're incorporating post-burn opportunity. And as many of you know, reforestation is the largest natural climate solution in the United States. But planting trees is great, but not all places are created equal when it comes to planting trees. And so in 2020, the original Reforestation Hub publication came out, and along with this tool that maybe some of you have played with. And the idea was to create a menu of reforestation opportunity options. And so this was created to kind of, narrow in on what you are focusing on. And the audience for this is really strategy makers, policy makers, those who want to look at their relative geography and kind of identify, hey, we can get the most bang for our buck in this region. Let's investigate reforestation opportunity or projects here. And so you can look at things like where are there challenging croplands, so we can get some additional co-benefits, floodplains. You can also kind of parse it out by owner, so private landowners versus state or federal. And one of the things that was included at that time was post-burn opportunity. Over the years, we've updated it several times with latest and greatest data, as well as feedback from users and our own TNC staff. And unfortunately, during one of those updates, the decision was made to kind of remove the post-burn opportunity. At the time, the data availability, it wasn't as great, and the project, the people in the project didn't feel comfortable, putting out a number. But we've heard loud and clear that is of interest, and so we're really happy to say we're working on several major updates. Thanks to the funding from Doris Duke Foundation, as well as the Volcano Climate Initiative, and we are 1/3 of the way through this project. Thanks to this funding, we have been able to update data sets, again, latest and greatest. Now there's a lot more annualized data. We've been able to ingest all of that. We've also refined our carbon estimates. One major thing with, for the Reforestation Hub is we give carbon output for putting trees on the landscape. And so you can kind of, yeah, and integrate that into some kind of climate plan. But now we have, updated that. The numbers are a little bit more conservative, but if you've been paying attention to the reforestation world, we've been pulling back a bit to be more realistic. We don't want to, promise the world when, overpromise these things. We've also excluded areas that have a net warming effect due to albedo. Raise your hand if you know what albedo is. All right. Yeah, so this is just essentially when you plant trees on the landscape, it can have a net warming because you're darkening the landscape. So we have removed those as reforestation opportunities. We've also streamlined the workflow immensely. The code base, when I inherited it about 3 years ago, took weeks to run. It now runs in hours. And so, technology has really enabled us to be more reactive to, annual updates of data sets. And finally, what you all are interested in, we're bringing back post-burn as an opportunity bucket. And so really quick, I'm just going to go through how we're looking at this. We are, again, at we're taking a broad look at this. We're looking at just burn severity in the past 20 years, because we are also interested in places that have burned and just have not recovered. And then we're crosswalking that with a tree cover data set. And so we take out anything that's burned that is over 50% tree, and then we are leaving the remainder as a post-burn opportunity. Again, we want to look at this, strategic level. You should definitely go to the places to decide where to plant trees. Don't use our data products pixel by pixel. And just a quick preview, we're still working on these values. The final values should be finalized soon, but just a preview, these are the top 5 states that provide the most carbon opportunity in the post-burn reforestation sphere. California alone makes up half of that, unsurprisingly. And yeah, another exciting thing is we are revamping our web tool. Right now it's a little archaic, and we're excited to bring it up to the future. And so one of the main things we're incorporating is the ability to do custom analyses. You can draw your own polygon, you can upload your own shapefile, and it's not stuck on that kind of county level, state level summary. And we're also, we're pretty much done with that first bullet, and a beta version will be out soon. But we're also scoping out other features, things like implementation information, are looking at potentially highlighting some local nurseries, additional resources, linking out to something like Planscape if you are really interested in a post-fire planning resource, and providing additional data on the tool itself. One of those things we are looking at is perhaps you could upload recent burn boundaries, so you could analyze all of the reforestation area in that, maybe use some of our buckets to really narrow down what you're looking to get out of your reforestation project. But we would love to hear from you all. And so what's next? As I've already kind of previewed, the beta version of our tool should be ready by the end of this year. We will probably be looking for beta users. So if that's of interest to you, please reach out. We also have a mailing list. If you go to the Reforestation Hub website, it's like a banner that comes up. Feel free to join that, and you'll be given the most up-to-date information. And we're exploring more frequent updates and improvements. As we said, I can run it in an hour now. Again, it took weeks before, and it was very hard on my computer. That is no longer the case. There are more annualized data sets coming out every, quarter, it seems like, and we're really interested in hearing from users what they want to see and making more updates, pending funding and interest. So, yeah. Oh, thank you. Yes. Reach out to me. Yes. Is there a list of participants' emails going out?
We'll share recording of this afterwards and contact
You can also come up to me after this. I'll give you my email. All right. Thank you all.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Reed Van Beveren. I'm the Deputy Director of the Technology Team at the Environmental Policy Innovation Center. We're a national nonprofit whose mission focuses on increasing the pace and scale of progress, as many others here have said, on environmental issues, reforestation being one of those. So thanks very much for the opportunity to share a little bit of our work, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to start by describing the kind of big picture as I see it, right? We've made significant investments in reforestation over the past few years, and we're poised to make many more investments in reforestation, but we're still getting highly variable results from those investments. And the variability and the change is only accelerating, right? And so we have some pictures here of some of the different outcomes that we see in terms of projects. And so, the question here is, what do all of these reforestation projects have in common? Well, at first glance, not a lot. But what they actually do have in common is that we should be learning from them, right? We should be treating them as failures and successes that are data for learning and fuel for innovation. And so we want to help build that system that is able to do that rapid learning, right? But there are barriers in the way. And so, and when I say barriers, I'm primarily thinking of the public sector. That's where our work is kind of grounded. So let's get to the barriers. So the first is around outcome-based metrics. In some sense, there's broad alignment on the outcomes, wanting to have successful reforestation, developed into healthy, resilient forests. But where there's not alignment is on indicators and metrics of success, right? At the national level, we have acres planted, we have monitoring of seedling survival rates at all different intervals, we have all kinds of cutting edge science that's telling us things about stressors to seedlings. So there's a lot of different options out there in terms of indicators and metrics. And those indicators and metrics all shape everything downstream, right? That shapes what innovators are working on, that shapes what the teams on the ground are working on. And so right now, there's a barrier there. Once you have those metrics in place, and moving more towards outcomes-based metrics, the way that you understand success is by monitoring those. And right now there's a lot of barriers to monitoring, right? We have kind of a weird situation right now where it feels like there's a ton of innovation in terms of monitoring. There's never been more options. And yet in the public sector, it still feels like monitoring is relatively hard. And for all but the most basic metrics, right? Even if we did have, ubiquitous, amazing monitoring, we don't have the data systems and the information systems in place to handle all of that information that would come in from all that monitoring. And there's also a people dimension to the barriers that we think about as well, right? Like, what are the skill sets on the ground to handle all of that information, to be able to experiment, to be able to learn at scale? And so all of these barriers kind of add up to a situation where, we're preventing learning at the clip that we need to be, and it's creating uncertainty, and it's creating a bias toward inaction. And so we want to help move the system towards a system that's biased towards action. So just a little bit about like our overall approach, my team's approach. So one of the ways that we've been increasingly thinking about our work is enabling adaptive management that's focused on outcomes, and really building the policies, programs, and partnerships to influence that system in that direction, right? So one piece of the puzzle here is around centering on outcomes and incentivizing monitoring. And I'll get into some concrete steps for each of these in the next slide, so I'm not going to spend time here. The second one is really about creating spaces for rapid learning and experimentation. And really what I mean here is policies and programs that are designed to expect failure and to learn from it, and to really like enable the people on the ground to be able to experiment and iteratively learn quickly to pursue better reforestation outcomes. Building efficient communication networks. I both mean this in the sense of person-to-person communication, and that's we host a lot of communities of practice to build that kind of trust around the data and tools, as well as think about designing information systems once that trust is built that can cross some of the boundaries that need to be crossed. And then fourth, we also think about the people aspect, right? And at a moment where there's been intense disruption to the workforce that's carrying out much of the reforestation work in the public sector, we're taking this moment to really think about how the craft of land management is evolving from a skill sets perspective. Okay, so getting into some ideas about concrete steps for how we could move towards a more system that's geared towards rapid learning, right? So one thing that we think about is better alignment on outcomes-based metrics and clear communication about them. And really what I mean here is doing the work to kind of understand the landscape and where we are today, and then communicating about them and the utility of the metrics so that innovators have the demand signals they need to continually work in the direction that we want to go. Right? So this might look like, you know, understanding what are the most basic metrics, what are the kind of pie in the sky metrics, but having a clear direction of travel that this is the desired end goal that we want to get to, and get innovators moving in that direction. We want to see more projects that are aimed at lowering the cost, the true cost of monitoring reforestation in the field. And by true costs, what I really mean is not just the cost of the technology, but the cost to the person on the ground in terms of the opportunity cost even of what all the things that they might have to deal with in a given day, right? Like really understanding how that information is used on the ground and how it's built into their workflows. And I would love to see more projects that really have that as the frame. A third piece, right, more to that experimental, like how do we give people cover to experiment? Piloting experimental forests that not only treat policy, or not only treat land management as kind of the variable that's being studied, but actually treat policy, workforce, technology as all like spheres of innovation within kind of a reimagined experimental forest framework, right? I love experimental forests. I think they're incredible sources of knowledge, and I think there could be an opportunity to build on that and all of the other experimentation out there in a new model that incorporates technology. And then finally, we are working to rethink the specific roles and skill sets of land managers. We're building a land management skills taxonomy that's thinking about the evolution of those skill sets that would be required to use monitoring technology much more effectively in the future, to take advantage of AI, to ask the right questions, right? The role of a team that's doing reforestation could look very different in the future. Okay, and then just getting to some more kind of like, what could the end goal of all this work kind of look like to make it a little bit more concrete, right? So one idea would be in the policy sphere, right? What would a Replant Act 2.0 look like that not only, you know, provides a ton of funds and invests in reforestation, but also acknowledges kind of those differences in metrics and where we want to go, and maybe incentivizes monitoring for metrics that actually tell us more about how successful we were. At the kind of program level, right, we'd love to see something like an experimental digital forest designation or a network of experimental forests that have a really rich soup of technology, right? Like bring all of the monitoring technology into one place so we can learn about it quickly together and really understand some of how particular places are changing. In terms of information, right, what that would look like is monitoring data that's flowing into something maybe like a digital forest plan, right? So like a blockchain based place to put data that mirrors kind of the forest plans currently, right? And we have a team that's working on that piece as well. And then finally, in terms of people, right, it might look like a reimagined forester role, and it might entail some new certifications, right? It might the degree programs that the forestry school degree programs might look a little bit different in the future. So those are just some ideas, and I'd love to have conversations with anyone who's interested in kind of thinking about different ways to approach this big picture problem. But just to kind of round it out, right? I am a firm believer that culture eats policy and strategy. And so all of what I've talked about is kind of a way to shape the culture of land management in a productive direction. And so if I had one wish, it would be commit to creating a culture of learning and accountability in land management. So I hope you'll all join me in that. And thank you very much.
Let's find out. Great. All right. All right, we're going something totally different. We're going to the land of private lands and people. I'm Alex Murdoch. I'm a senior policy advisor at the Nature Conservancy, and I work a lot on NCS policy, reforestation policy, improved forest management policy across a lot of different policy vehicles. And this is actually going to be an area that we all love. I'm going to take you into the land of tax policy. Thank you, I'm glad you're awake. So a lot of these issues, so on one of the slides here, it was 7% of the project area, I think in one of the Planscape lists, was private land, and then there were all these other lands around that. But we really do like to talk about the Replant Act and about the big areas of land that need to be handled. In the East Coast, we love talking about the private land. So I'm sneaking this in here, and I appreciate your letting me do that. The private lands costs for reforestation are very high, and people are not reforesting on private lands. And we have really limited options for post-fire reforestation at the federal level in particular. And that really happens, that gets triggered after you have an emergency, and then you suddenly, over time, you get those flows to landowners. And so that is one of the gaps that we have in terms of like how we get to do things really quickly. How do we get that funding and the right amount of funding to people without way too many hoops to go through that you can't get there in time? But in addition to that, we've got all of these other supply chain issues that are in just a whole host of steps that we need for reforestation. So the site prep input and maintenance costs, the private sector capacity around the supply chain, the fact of an emergency that there's a lot of pre-planning that we can do, but do we? The fact that where seedlings are grown and where seedlings are needed are often mismatched, especially in the Intermountain West. And then there's just the research that we need for the climate smart innovation. And so a whole bunch of things. And in policy, we kind of have to ask, what's your driving? Like, where do you want to push the lever so that you kind of get the dominoes to fall in the most helpful way possible for the most people? So the question I have for this space, and I really am throwing this out there as like a question, is what if we had $300 per acre from the federal government for project outplanting costs for reforestation post-fire? And that's very different than if you're talking about unproductive land that's been flooded for several years around the Mississippi River Basin, and you're thinking for a while and you're going to move from that finally into, say, trees. This is a different application. And $300 per acre post-fire in California gets you only so far because of the pre-treatment costs, et cetera. So this is like is this helpful in this scenario kind of true question. But we have this thing where if you can get a whole bunch of stakeholders into one place around a type of investment vehicle like that, we can get movement at the federal level. So if $300 per acre can help here, and it can help in Maine, and it can help in Georgia, then we have kind of a winning combo deal on the policy front. So this concept that we put together that we're kind of testing across these different spaces is if we have land that was historically forested, which obviously it would be in these spaces, and a landowner says yes to a management plan and agrees to keep their land forested for 20 years, are we willing to give them a transferable or a refundable tax credit one time after they've put the trees in the ground and said, these are my costs. Thank you very much. I'll take the payment. And that is a question, right? That's the open question. Is that a good idea? Because what we need to do to be successful in that type of ginormous policy is we need to create this big tent, like I mentioned. We need to provide something that's got that science backing to it and is giving us the outcomes. And we have to also connect that to real benefits to communities and taxpayers. In this case, you know, you've got a whole community, say, in the Central Sierras that needs to be reforested. The whole community is under pressure to come back to life, to what it was before the fire. And then just this question of, are we leveraging with federal dollars? And this has kind of become super central in policy discussions today. What are we leveraging with the federal dollars? The idea is now we're going to reduce the footprint or the input on the federal side to something smaller than we're used to. So would this be something that would leverage a lot of other private and public money because of the piece that the federal government, the signal that the federal government is sending? So the one wish is that today I would suddenly have the answers to these questions. Is this a real need? Like, is this the lever to push? And yes, it would be very helpful because we all do say this. If only we had the money, if only we had the money, then it would happen. And I'm not so sure that's true, but it really may be as well. It might be yes. And then if so, is $300 an acre from the federal pot a good answer to help meet that need? And if not, why not?
Circle back to that question during this.
All right. Hi, old friends and new friends. I'm Jenny Biggs, as you can tell from there. I lead the Wildfire Resilience Initiative work at the Moore Foundation and some other stuff that is less relevant today, so I won't get into that. But I am super excited to be here, and really, I wanted to do three things. I'm the last person in this panel, so I wanted to first of all make sure that I can, I think this was Rob's words, but be bold, be brief, and be gone. Because frankly, I would rather hear you all answer the questions that we just heard from Alex and also get to hear your questions and have the rest of these panelists field those questions. So I'll go pretty quickly, but I do want to just acknowledge also the sort of sobering reality of where we are in thinking about where we are with the wildfire challenge right now and where we're headed. And then also, I want people to walk away with just a pragmatic sense of hope. So let's see if I can do that in just a couple of minutes. So that's my main message here. Really, this is a huge. It's a growing. It's a big, and it's an urgent challenge. But it also really is a big opportunity. And first of all, I mean, I think you all know this, but in areas like where we work in Western North America, the reality is a hotter and drier future. You can think of the atmosphere as being a drying sponge. And so it's basically soaking up more of the moisture from trees and vegetation and from soil. And that's why we see, for example, in the UNEP report back in 2022, over the last 20 years, extreme wildfires have more than doubled. And they had predicted that it would be another 30% increase by 2050, another 50% increase by the end of the century. So definitely a more fiery future. Grantees that we've supported also were able to use newer Earth observation data to document the fact that in the American West, the average peak daily growth rates for fires have also more than doubled in the last 20 years. So it's not just an increase in incidence and severity, it's also an increase in speed. And it's those fast fires that are causing the vast amount of loss and damage for communities. But in this area where we work, Western North America for our wildfire work, so Alaska, British Columbia, and the western part of the lower 48, these are all ecosystems that are adapted for fire. And so it's not just climate change, it's also an over century of fire exclusion that's part of the problem. And that's why this is also part of the solution. We really can increase resilience across this area if we can figure out ways to make sure that these ecosystems and the communities are able to receive fire and even thrive with it. Um, so at the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, we are a tiny team of 3. We really don't do the hard work. We get the money out the door to the amazing grantees who are doing amazing things. And we also have the privilege to work with a lot of other partners, other NGOs, federal and state agencies, provincial agencies in BC. But the work that we are doing is all focused on upstream solutions. And you may be wondering why I'm here on a reforestation panel. That's okay. That's good. Other questions, other voices in the room. Let's bring it. Okay, so early fire, pre-fire. I think Libby made this point. It's still going. Libby made this point and quickly, but so not to gloss over, if we're thinking about ecosystems that have fire as an integral part of what they need for ecosystem health, they have regular return intervals. So although we sort of frame our work as being in early fire and pre-fire, that should also be post-fire if we have the healthy fire regimes that we want. For us, we had explicit instructions from our founders to not work on disaster response and recovery. So that's why we frame things this way. But I guess I just want to make the point that we're all in this together, and we all know that. So our work on early fire is really where our work started, focusing on how philanthropy can support the science and the technology to improve early detection and tracking of fires, specifically to enable more ecologically beneficial fire and also to respond more quickly and safely and effectively when extreme wildfire threatens. On the pre-fire front, we focus on modeling to identify and prioritize the mitigations that will really matter for these communities to be able to decrease their vulnerability by disrupting those speed-based fire pathways into communities and then from structure to structure within them. And this is exactly what we saw happen in Altadena, Pacific Palisades, and Lahaina. So that's why we are focused there, because we want communities to be able to coexist with and even thrive with fire on the landscape around them. And so last piece there is just focusing on the modeling to really help us understand the trade-offs and the prioritization for the stewardship actions that will bring in the modeling over 50 to 100 years so that we can make sure that we're thinking about these ecosystems with an eye to future conditions and not just what they're experiencing today. We've also got some cross-cutting work that supports all of this. But when we think about really trying to scale this across space, and this is where we need help. So for funders in the room and others who have ideas, I would love to keep the conversation going afterwards. But we have a handful of these pilots across Western North America that were selected intentionally to be really different. So we're talking about different ecosystems, different socio-political conditions, different economies. And what we're trying to do is in communities and watersheds, distill the common set of ingredients that basically add up to a recipe for resilience. So what these places need to do, if what you're looking at is trying to decrease community vulnerability to extreme wildfire, and what these places need to do if what you're doing is focusing in watersheds and trying to decrease vulnerability to extreme wildfire. Now, we're a philanthropy and our resources are finite too. So we don't have more than these right now. If people are interested in working in these areas with us, let us know. And there are other geographies where people may be doing work. And my feeling is we will learn faster and better together if we have more of these pilots underway. So it's an open invitation to anyone who wants to keep talking about that. But that's really what we're trying to do, is distill that recipe and scale it across space so that once we're really clear on what those basic elements are, we can then share them with other places that maybe aren't as far along in their planning, but don't need to start from scratch. And then the other piece on here for scale is also, I think, really important to consider scaling across time. And on that piece, what we want to be thinking about is, of course, there are the initial costs, the initial speed bump in getting to more resilience, but there's also the need to think about sustaining and maintaining those mitigations and those stewardship activities over time. And so really thinking about the sustainable project finance. So anybody who was in the room for the panels yesterday and learning from Quantified Ventures and Blue Forest and others, I think that's really a big piece of the picture, figuring out how we're going to afford this, because it's not one and done for wildfire resilience. But if I had one wish, so back to the original point that I made, we are going to have more fire anyway. So if we can pull some kind of jujitsu move, as I always say, and try to take the fire that's coming anyway and use as much of that as we can for ecological benefit, I think we all win. I ran into Tom Steyer in the elevator this morning. So cheaper, faster, better is on my mind from his book. And I think it's one of these solutions that's relatively low cost. It's coming anyway. So how can we figure out a way to maximize what we're going to be dealing with anyway? So my wish here, I didn't mean to be totally cryptic, but we deal with rain, we deal with sun, and we don't want too much of those. And I think we need to think about fire in the same way. It just is. It's good and it's bad. And what we want to be able to do is to really think of how not to perceive it only with fear and to figure out how we can absolutely just live with it and thrive with it. So that's it from me. And now I want to hear the answers to the questions that Alex posed. So
If we can have panelists stay up here, that'd be great. So we're gonna move to a different section of the panel discussion right now. So we're gonna first allow all of you to answer questions or ask questions of the folks who have already spoken. And then we're going to move into another panel phase where, surprise, you guys are all a part of the panel as well. And we're going to ask some questions directed to our panel members on the stage, but also to our panel members in the audience. So first and foremost, let's start with some questions for our speakers. So if anybody has any that they would like to ask.
That's Alex.
Here we go. $3 per acre. What would be the number of stems per hectare for that?
It depends. Right.
Yeah, like that would be an important factor. Do you know like a rough average, kind of what you'd be targeting?
So the from the federal policy side, the question is kind of the number, $300. We came up with that from looking at some averages, knowing that it would almost, given the planting densities in southern US, it would basically cover everything. But if we kept going 400, 500 to 600, it could overcompensate. And so it's a choice. And there's no like requirement for like it's literally the way that we're thinking about it now is to have as few requirements in the concept as possible so that we don't have people jumping through hoops to try to figure out whether they fit into or don't fit into the concept. So it's really, the question is how many acres for whatever outplanting costs you need to do on those acres. And so whether or not that $300 would be useful, given the number of trees you need to plant over the number of acres you think, and the preparation costs and other that would be a part of it. Is that helpful?
No,
There's a different question that's behind your question.
I think, yeah, no, I think that's perfect. I've got some more, but I think I'll probably find you afterwards and we can ask more questions. I can hand it to somebody else.
Hi, everyone. Matthew, Viridian Ecosystems. Good to see everybody. Alex, awesome. Money on the table, I think, is the type of catalytic change that I think would be receptive to a lot of landowners in the post-fire environment. What I struggle with, so this is part comment, part question, is you mentioned there would be some accountability with that, some sophistication required by the landowners to fill out some sort of form, hire service providers, put a plan together. And I think the cost is going to move in a reverse incentive direction. So in the timber economies of the western side of the mountains of the West, for example, it'll be more affordable to take advantage of $300 an acre. And that'll hit the ground right away. As we move into the interior, less service providers, major divestment from industry, higher costs because of the distance to mills, all the other things that come with it. And the sophistication of landowners and the ability to leverage a forester is going to go down dramatically, right? So is there a geographic basis of which you could kind of calibrate that 300, because that's meaningful work. It would cover at least the seedlings, some of the spraying, maybe some of the planting cost. So like, how could we calibrate that accordingly? Because I think that could be powerful.
So, yeah, we could do that, right? Like there are interesting models, like through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program, where you think about how things work in different regions. So that would be one way to do something like that. What we need to do that is the need, right? Like right now, actually, I didn't say any for the two requirements. Essentially what we're trying to do is, has anybody done like gone and used like either a solar tax credit or like a home energy improvement tax credit? It's like some of these requirements are super crazy simple. You just need to like get a person who was certified to sell that product to sign your paperwork to say they sold you the thing, and then to give you a receipt. So the question that I've been struggling with is, how do we stick with that simplicity that makes the IRS happy and makes us happy for what we might end up getting on the landscape without getting too much of what we don't want on the landscape? So I think this question of like maybe $300 an acre for X, or if you're in this other category, it's $500 an acre for Y. But we have to be able to model out what that how much demand that $500 would get. Because the $300 an acre for 10 years, it would be about $5 billion of incentivized, at the absolute incentivized reforestation, 20 million acres, $5 billion, because we have a cap on capacity to produce seedlings, right? And so we know that we can't spend more than 5 billion because we can't produce more than 5 billion year after year. So any other expenditure, we would just need to be able to calculate how it would get capped so that the Treasury knows that we're not going to drain it. Like that's kind of how they do their estimates. So is that?
Hello, my name is Richard Campbell. I'm with American Forest Foundation. We've known how to plant trees and get them to grow. Hi, Jenny. How to get trees to grow for a very long time, right? I'm curious if there's been any development in climate-informed planting practices, either site prep, seedling choice, density, what have you, and then how that might square up with state requirements for reforestation density or other environmental protections around watersheds or other sensitive resources.
Yeah, I will say. Can you guys hear me? Definitely. I think every single project is a bit of a, I wouldn't say it's an experiment, but we have an opportunity to try some different things. And I'm thinking largely within the public lands context in answering this question. The work we do with the Forest Service, we have recently heard and seen some past projects where pre-fire site prep, reducing the biomass volume of the dead trees, there's some regret in not doing more, because when it reburned, right, you lost that investment. So I think, mechanical site prep, chemical site prep, all these different techniques are extremely important to get the end results that we're after, which is a healthy and resilient forest, right? And from a fuels perspective, right, thinking through also the live biomass that returns, the dead biomass that's there, managing that fuel load. That was a big part of the conversations with our partners in South Central Oregon when we laid out those 106 management units, right? Really thinking through at a landscape scale as well, not just at the unit level, but at a landscape scale. When fire does return, in that context, you'll have regeneration, you'll have pockets where you didn't make those investments because it wasn't a priority, right? And then you'll have pockets that you're just treating, say for fuel reduction in a standing green forest still. So really thinking holistically about that landscape. So, it starts at that unit level with, choices around seed, planting density, species composition, stock type, all of these things. and then really goes out from there. And I would say, because we've done the resilience planning framework at American Forest, it's had us thinking a lot about questions about assisted migration and working very closely with geneticists to determine, what that future forest is going to look like, where you're drawing that seed from, and all of that thought at the resilience planning phase actually paid out. Like last year, we had a huge cone crop in that same geography. After all those fires, we had only 15% of the seed that we needed to do that 250,000 acres of reforestation. Because we had been consulting with geneticists and the landowners, we took advantage of that cone crop, and we were able to get the climate adapted seed that we needed for the specific prioritized sites. So again, thinking about this systemically, it's a long-winded answer to your question, but there's a lot that goes into it.
Can I jump in too? Some of the cross-cutting work that we support is on academic research and traditional knowledge, and the like thinking around how to prepare these ecosystems to receive fire in a healthy way is a lot of what we're trying to support. And one of the groups that we have been supporting is Malcolm North, Andrew Latimer, Brent Kuntz, and this work around operational resilience and really thinking about how to take sort of academic theory around resilience and have some meaningful operational guidance for that. And of course, it depends on the ecosystem, but looking at things like stand density index and where strategic fire zones could be, and pulling all of that together with a list of recommendations. So that work is underway now and should be coming soon. And on the point about the sort of disequilibrium too that ecosystems sometimes face, Chris Field's team at Stanford has been doing a lot of that too. So for example, they look at these lower elevation mixed conifer forests and the fact that a quarter of them are already like in a vegetation mismatch with climate. And so when you start to think about the operational decisions and how you want to encourage resilience in the long run, you wouldn't necessarily be planting the same stuff there that that's there right now. So anyway, academic research that isn't all out there yet, but coming soon and hopefully helpful.
I'll add one more thing to that really quickly, and just to stick a pin in what you were saying, Jenny, like the operational aspects of this are really what is lacking at this point in time. Is we have this theory of what we like, the theory of change behind how we think we do climate adaptation work in the reforestation space, but we don't have a whole lot of information about how that's actually transpiring on the ground. And so I think that, if we think about the reforestation opportunity that Brian was talking about at the beginning, and the Forest Service is saying 3.6 million acres right now in terms of their need on National Forest System lands alone. That is a huge opportunity to actually start thinking about what climate informed reforestation looks like and see how that's manifesting on the ground. And to Reed's entire presentation, right? Like, how do we actually start thinking about using that as a living landscape to monitor and understand that adaptive management framework? We have a huge opportunity in a giant living laboratory right now. And this is the time to kind of take stock of that and move on to that experimentation phase with all of this. So thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Sorry, I'm going to jump into. It's a good question, and I think like the role software plays here is like, how do we pull that academic current best thinking and democratize that and just put that into a website, so some like a practitioner doesn't have the resources or the time to go and read all the papers from Stanford and think, well, what should I do here? And like, let's get analytical about it. The clock is ticking post fire, and like, giving, how do we pull those things into an easy to use interface so that people can kind of access the best thinking? And the thinking is going to change, and the thinking around climate is going to change. But like, how do we put that and make that accessible to anybody so that like immediately after fire, people can start planning and start getting the right work done?
And this is why we love Planscape.
And I could add one thing just on that, in terms of getting the latest academic research and cutting edge science into practice. I think of some of the models that developed during the pandemic and whether they might be applicable here, right? Like the living evidence model, where there's kind of a continuous systemic review of all research coming out on particular topics that's really tailored towards delivering that information at much quicker intervals, rather than kind of the longer typical academic cycles. So I think there are models to look to for that would be complementary to Planscape.
Hi, Francois here. I work for an impact investor that invests, among other things, in nature tech. And so I'm curious, we've talked a lot about technology upstream, right, of reforestation, and then at the end for monitoring. But what about technologies that help to make the actual reforestation faster, right? And if you could give us examples of what that looks like.
While they're thinking, I'll jump in and just put a plug in for one of the things that we were so lucky to be able to support early on, which sort of gets to that, which is BurnBot. And if you all haven't heard about it already, are you familiar with BurnBot? So basically, closed containment prescribed burning and being able to prepare the land, and also think about like the biochar that's left behind, to be able to actually regenerate much more quickly too. But when you have conditions where you can't do prescribed burns or manage wildfire as easily because it's too dangerous, it's a solution to be out there. And I'm sure they have suggestions for others that are directly for preparing the land.
Yeah, no, I think you mentioned biochar, and I'll just throw out there that on the West Coast, the largest cost generally post-fire is going to be mechanical site prep. So any technology that can help us with that problem, and you have a shelf life generally of when that material has merchantable value, right? So maybe up to 2 years for ponderosa pine, right? So when I say the costs go up dramatically, that's because there's no value in any removal of that material to mill it, right? So, and even if there is, like the bootleg fire, a lot of that forest was small diameter wood to begin with, small diameter trees of very low to negative value. So helping us crack that nut will help us drive change on that 2.75 million acres. Biochar is one of those technologies. I think some of the advances in the voluntary carbon market supporting biochar and things like that, we can certainly look at that. But dealing with that issue will help us grow the right seedlings and get those in the ground faster. So that's one thought.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kyle Zezo. I'm a little probably an outlier in this room. I work with the unscripted entertainment industry, so reality shows, competition shows, and whatnot. But this is all very interesting. And I'm curious from everybody on this panel, and forgive my ignorance on this, but what the broader public perception of these solutions is. We know there's a lot of misinformation out there about wildfires in general, but I'm curious if it affects this side of things. And then also, is that something that you guys think about and plan for in your work beyond just monitoring it, but also like, there's talk of policy, there's talk of solutions that need scaling. So is that something that goes into your planning, thinking about how to impact the public perception of this?
I'll jump in, and hopefully people have other things to add too. But we did some polling early on because we were, of course, advocating for more managed wildfire and wanted to understand how much of a hurdle we needed to get over with public opinion on that one. I was really surprised with the results. We polled across Alaska, BC, western part of the lower 48, all of that area, and across political aisles, across urban, rural. People are really supportive of prescribed fire and managed wildfire, and that surprised me. I thought that there was more of an opposition to that than we found. What we didn't, we did ask if people minded an increase in smoke, and they also did not mind that. But what we didn't ask was, okay, so do you mind an increase of smoke for 3 extra days a year, or 5 extra days a year, or 10 extra days a year? Because if you think about California and the amount of smoke that we used to have, that people just don't, we take this fire exclusion for granted. And so we don't have answers on that piece yet, but I would like to get a finer understanding of what we're really asking people to put up with, as well as some of the real quantifiable health benefits of the lower, slower, cooler fire versus extreme wildfire. And if we can say it's a false choice between fire and no fire, smoke and no smoke. So are you comfortable with this versus getting clearer on that? The other thing is that we also work with a peer funder who's done a lot of polling around, especially post LA, the kinds of arguments that are going to be resonant with people. And what that research found was, first of all, across political aisles, the sort of economic arguments are very clear and resonant regardless. Arguments around climate and around carbon only resonate with very blue audiences. The other thing that resonates across aisles is around drought and water scarcity and water security. And then they got into some other finer points around sort of defensible space and home hardening too. And I think that's where the economic argument has to really come in and people understand the upfront investment versus what they're actually standing to lose if they don't put in the upfront investment. So anyway, just a few ideas that are scattered, but I can share lots of that research with you so that you have it too, and it'll be far better organized than it just was off the top of my.
I can think of two. One is just the dichotomy between the argument for thinning and removing trees from the landscape and simultaneously trying to plant in post-fire landscapes. So recognizing that there's spatial delineations between where that reforestation is usually happening and we're putting trees back on the landscape and the locations where we're doing thinning and we're trying to mitigate the risk of future fire. That's one I've heard a few times. I think the other piece in general is that an unmanaged forest is healthy, right? And coming back to the standpoint of that choice to not manage that forest is still a management decision, but we have the opportunity to do better and to manage for a better future, a more climate resilient future, and a more wildfire resilient future is the other one that I think that we tend to hear a decent amount. I think as a group, we need to do better in terms of explaining what those differences are and kind of taking a stand against some of those management myths. And, I think there's a science communication component to that. I think that there's a more general communication component to that, but I think that there are definitely ways that the community as a whole needs to kind of step up and better market. I don't know if that's the right word, but better market how we actually approach that communication space, because it's really important to have that public perception and social buy-in.
That was it. So I wanted to just give like a pull back to a national look at this. When we did the Replant Act, which basically brought us from around 300 million a year to U.S. Forest Service for federal lands for reforestation. And now I think we're at what, like 130 million, 150? I don't know with the current tariffs. 130. I mean, what are we getting now? I said 30 to start, and so it was. So here's the issue. We worked on this together, so we're. Can you tell? So the bottom line is, whether it's 30 million or 130 million, we're not paying for it as taxpayers. This is Chinese, like basically tariffs on Chinese imported wood products are paying for the Replant Act, right? So we didn't have to find out how much Americans valued and wanted to pay for reforestation on federal lands during that process. It's great that we got the bill passed and we're accruing a nice amount of funding that's still not enough for the federal lands. So the question is, like, for Americans across the country from the federal side, if that's where we, what is that perception? What is that value? And can we tell that story across the country in a way that resonates for the different types of reforestation needs, or just for post-wildfire reforestation needs? And I don't think from the community level and the community benefit level, like we don't quite know how good we are at telling that and what's missing in that story.
Thanks. Good afternoon, Paul Tigan. Before I do what I do now, I was a federal land manager for about 15 years. And I'm happy to hear that it sounds like you've had some good interactions with the Fremont Wainema as part of your bootleg project. But almost everyone's conversation has an interaction with a federal land manager. And as someone who's made decisions, signed NEPA documents, faced the public, been sued, I'm really curious about the work that you've done to integrate the decision-making context of the land manager more fully in your recommendations and your projects. Because this is an observation from my time when I was managing the fires on that map and signing documents, is that people have lots of good ideas, but they're not necessarily integrated into how decisions are made or reflect our need to make decisions that are integrated with a plan that was signed 20 years ago. And we can't just say, oh, here's a great new way to make a decision. That's just not how NEPA works. So I'm curious, like, taking that great example, if there's other folks who are working with federal managers to make sure that your recommendations are grounded in something they can make decisions from.
I'll jump in here from a Planscape perspective. Like that's exactly the space that we want to, if we're just creating these theoretically, this would be nice to do, but like the NEPA process is running on a parallel path, we failed. So like our users are often in a NEPA process or some other, a SEQA or some other kind of permitting process. And we're designing the needs of those tools around that planning, collaboratives and the sort of IDTs that do that work, and making sure those outputs help, take some friction out of that NEPA process and accelerate those things, which is a painful, space to be in, but it's super important. Like we can't just exist theoretically. We have to kind of get the work done on the ground and try and, pace and scale is really about removing friction there. So, absolutely. And we do a lot of, Jordan and team do a lot of user research with those users to make sure we're understanding those processes and we're building around their needs.
Yeah, and just with the Fremont Wainema example, all of that work was done pre-decisional. We came in, they were really facing, the whole community was like, what are we going to do about this? And we intentionally made it actually an all lands plan because of that. I think that actually complicated some of the engagement of the FreeWin. We can have a longer conversation about that. But the whole idea, to Rob's point, is to like accelerate the way in which we engage in these collaborative discourses around the alternatives and the options through the National Environmental Policy Act and all of the ways in which we can implement that act, including categorical exclusions, to do this work, right? So I think that technology can help us with that. It can help us with that decision making and that sort of engagement of different perspectives and voices. So that's why we're moving in this direction.
I'll just make a plug quick for categorical exclusions, and you can move on to another question. But after the Beachy Creek fire in Western Oregon, I managed the team that did salvage on behalf of BLM, and that mechanical thinning that is really important as part of getting ready for the next forest. We were able to use categorical exclusions to move quick and recover that timber. And when you go into the Portland airport, you'll see it hanging above your head. But to your point, the Forest Service wasn't able to do that and did not recover anything from that fire and is spending millions of dollars, almost per mile of road to try and make those roads safe for people. And they're still closed 5 years later. So the need to act quick is real, and it's hundreds of thousands of acres across the Oregon landscape.
I'll just add one more comment on that, and just echo what Brian said in terms of like the planning process is intended to make it easier for the folks on that landscape. Jordan mentioned that version 1 of this Planscape reforestation module that we're working on really is intended to have that initial output ready to get input into facts so that we can start having those conversations about what funds we're going to be able to get from replant and how we can start moving that process forward. I mean, even getting to that point where they can get that into the reporting database is really challenging for some forests based on the capacity that they do have at this point in time. And so really our intention is try to relieve that burden from those wonderful public employees who are doing an amazing amount of work and really try to make it easier for them to support the reforestation process there. So really we're trying to build that into every single aspect of what we do with this post-fire reforestation work, is really thinking about like that capacity component. And if we can get to the point where we can build out this nice, as I'm calling it, go big or go home version of the reforestation module, then we'll think about the workforce capacity, the costs, the compliance and permitting, all of those pieces within this one ecosystem. So we're really trying to alleviate some of that burden from those folks. So
I'll just add real quick, in terms of the long-term vision and some of what I was describing, like, I think one thing that something like a digital forest plan is intended to achieve is allow tying projects to that, 20-year-old document in a much more seamless way, right? To be able to understand how does that map on and quickly, rather than having all that kind of uncertainty that makes it a little bit cumbersome. And then the other thing I would say is that, from the lawsuit perspective, right, my understanding is that there's just an incentive often to throw kind of everything into the permitting process or to an assessment before updating the land management plan. And by emphasizing monitoring and having that data, the hope is that some of those things would become routine and they would be so well documented in terms of their actual outcomes that would relieve some of the pressure on decision makers in the future. So long-term vision, but hopefully it'll help.
Okay. Yeah, so I run a drone reforestation company out of Canada called Flash Forest, but we've seen a sizable kind of shift in the funding landscape. So even the federal landscape in Canada, NRCan, it's kind of been hit and miss to just to allocate some funding, and I think recognition of new technologies, and also on the corporate side, we had Trump kind of formally announce a couple days ago that climate change doesn't exist at the United Nations, and so yeah, I think there's a lot of kind of unpredictability in funding in the federal and in the private space. I'm curious where the panelists think funding is going to be for post-wildfire reforestation, the dominant amount, and I think the recommended path to kind of allocate that for reforestation companies that are looking to kind of be part of the scale narrative, which is what we're trying to do.
I'm going to add to that. So thank you for asking that question. And for our panelists, in addition to where you think it's going to come from, where do you think it should come from? And I will pose that question back to the audience as well. So Alex, go for it.
I hope we're all friends after this. So we have this strange, like, disaster response framework that's horrible, where everybody chases money after a disaster over this horrible, and then chases each other's money to try and pay back for everything that you borrowed. And so if we take maybe over in the East Coast, a lot of hurricane-based damages, right? And now we're seeing a lot of money coming from the federal government. Can we predict whether that's going to come or not? No, and I think that's what you're at. Like, that is not a predictable thing from a private sector perspective. Will they or won't they? And that has been the way these emergency funds have been dispersed. And when you look at the different years, you can have a 0 year, a 0 year, a $1 billion year, a 0 year, a 0 year. So that's one bad answer. States are responding in interesting ways. Like Georgia has passed a reforestation payment. I think it's a tax payment over, I think it's limited. And if anyone's from Georgia here and can correct this and make it accurate, please do. But so the state legislature stepped up and said, this issue is affecting all of our landowners, and we are going to give a tax incentive or a response at X amount. Again, it's not something you can predict. And I think that's the challenge with in the disaster space. And I think that's part of why I coming at this question about, what's the type of predictable land cross situation reforestation funding that could be available for all sorts of scenarios and is there for post-disaster. And that's why I'm kind of interested in that sort of larger pot, bigger tent concept, so that we're not having to meet these boutique checklists. Who's interested in that? I don't, right? That's your other question, is where's the reliability on it? I do think, I mean, on the federal lands, the Replant Act is going to be working very well for a long time. That is, it's based on it's the tariffs of very particular wood products that are listed in a series, and we're just scooping, that money off of every import, and it's a monthly payment that goes into Treasury, and then it goes back over to the Forest Service to use. So, for the next couple of years, when we're doing tariffs on everybody, you're in good hands, right?
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's the Burned Area Emergency Response Program. That's and Bear and Bar. Those are appropriations that are set every year, and they could be expanded. I think that would be helpful, and those programs could become more robust. But again, and then can we continue to expand that type of, that's for treatment, stabilizing soils and lands, and then doing treatments afterwards. So those are two different streams of funding. So I think that type of thing, where that's something that is Congress's decision on an appropriations, like an annual funding stream. So every year we can get in there and make our case and hold Congress accountable for what we need. That is actually reliable under the right thoughtful circumstances. So I don't know if that's enough to work with for.
Just to add to it, I've been having a hard time with my name tag all day. Just to add to what you're saying, Alex, around the Replant Act, it gives us an anchor, right? An anchor funding source, but that in and of itself is not going to be enough, right? So it covers roughly 30% of the existing cost on the West Coast wildfire situation that we're dealing with, 30% nationally. So I think there's complementary discussions and needs for things like some of the innovations that we've been seeing with, Blue Forest and others, looking at payments based on the beneficiaries that are receiving the benefits of reforestation. California, 60%, the water comes from the Sierras and the mountains, right? So let's look at those areas that are burned, and how do we bring back a forest that is going to allow for snow capture, retention, slow distribution, providing those water benefits. We can do this modeling. We know that those benefits exist. So I do think that there's an element of definitely making the case for additional public policy here, but also element for looking at public policy that's local, state, and also just private sector support, and speaking directly to those people that benefit from those projects, right? I think we are well past, this is maybe a controversial statement to make, as the organization that helped birth the National Forest System, but I think we're actually well past the point where we can just rely purely on public policy and Congress to support the management and stewardship of our public lands, right? This is an all of society thing, the challenges that we have that require an all of society response. So looking at those creative solutions, looking at opportunities for public-private partnership and investment, I think is where we need to be looking. And take with that what you will, whether that's the carbon market or other approaches. I think there's some opportunities there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, Reed talked a lot about sort of outcome measurement and how do we think about measuring this work around the outcomes that it causes. And I think that's the key to unlocking the sort of scaled finance. Like, it is a societal problem. We should be reliant on government funding from state and from federal. We're all kind of reliant on Jenny and other philanthropic funders to help sort of fill the gaps around those things, and super grateful for it. But I think the scaled solutions come from things like Blue Forest, Freshwater Trust with their outcome banks, about thinking about what are those avoided costs. Like, the downstream costs of not doing this work are significantly higher than the cost of doing that work. So we have to figure out an outcome-based sort of narrative that makes people, like New York gets, Canadian wildfire smoke, and it impacts people's health, and thinking about what the costs of that are, and like, how do we tie that sort of macro zoomed out story together to have, utilities, private corporate industry, insurers, other people recognize that they're better off being in the preventative space than in the sort of recovery space is what sort of unlocks the scaled funding, I think. But it's hard.
Yeah, and I would just say philanthropic dollars are great if you can get them, but they're very limited, especially next to public agency dollars, which in turn are very limited if we can unlock the private capital. And so water utilities, electric utilities, I mean, ag companies, timber companies out in California where we are, wineries and the whole industry there, I think is an interesting way to go. Insurance, there's so many private sector actors who do have a vested interest in not having communities or ecosystems incinerated. So figuring out how to bring that all together, I think, is really the more stable answer. And then we aren't feeling like we're victims to political yo-yos back and forth, and can really just sort of tap into something that's much more sustainable in the long run. Maybe I'm not going to have any friends when I walk out of here. But I mean, one of the things that I've been worrying about with the carbon market from the beginning, again, because we're advocating for more fire, is that we not oversimplify, because we actually need to lose some carbon in order to retain carbon too. And so I think this idea of carbon carrying capacity is really important. But I also think thinking carefully about hedging your bets so that as political winds shift, you don't have all of your eggs in a basket in a place that is going to be a basket that is no longer available.
And I'll just speak quickly, especially to the carbon side of things. There's a lot of uncertainty with the carbon markets, and I think right now we're experiencing a little bit of analysis paralysis with, can we assure, we're going to get as much carbon out of this as we're expecting. And I think there needs to be and my colleagues, I think, would agree, we're working on to make a little bit of some more wiggle room in that, where we can have action and not just say, if this can't be guaranteed for 100+ years, it's not worth it. And as well as not, looking at not seeing the forest from the trees. Forests are important for many other reasons, not just carbon. And so really making sure we're communicating the co-benefits of forests and, all the other human health, economic, and, just general, recreation that we get to enjoy from forests. That is, I think, a much more palatable message to hear, especially for like the average citizen.
And so the tax incentive concept that I showed you all was actually first developed as an incentive to enter carbon markets, with a whole list of requirements for developing a project and entering it on market, and then showing that you have that you've promised to keep it in the market for X number of years with your certificate. So that was way too prescriptive. But the upfront cost of developing a carbon project, that is the barrier that everyone says is the barrier. It's a barrier for us for the projects that we're trying to put together and trying to get funding that's willing to be patient and willing to stay in the risk to try these projects and see how well they do. And there are a lot of recommendations from like WRI and others saying, this is that the carbon market space for reforestation is is the no-brainer, right? Because theoretically, there's just a lot of benefit back to a landowner where you're actually getting the payment that you need to stay the course with trees on the property. So I think it's an open question, but we're in there to try and figure it out and test and see what we can do with it. It's not the only answer, but we're definitely working it as a question.
One more? Time for one more? Hi, everybody. Daniel Berger with Tree People. We're a nonprofit focused in Southern California. Look forward to seeing how we could use some of these tools to apply there, accelerate to get in. As you say, it's so important to get in quickly in the first couple years. But Southern California is unique in a few ways. We don't have a timber industry. We don't have a biomass industry. And I'm curious thoughts on how we could jumpstart particularly that biomass industry. I know we're not going to get timber, particularly in light of the funding from the state in California, where our workforce development dollars from the state funding are keyed to the biomass industry, and how we might jumpstart that industry to take advantage of that.
I'll try. And again, I apologize. I see things through a Planscape lens. We're conscious of that problem. Like, in California, the resilience treatments typically cost, $2,000 to $3,000 an acre on average, more in the places that we really need to do the work. And that's expensive. So we're thinking like, how can we bring that cost down by trying to, and most of that treatment is removing biomass, which is either masticated or it's burnt or it's left in piles that we think we might burn, but we never really do. And like, so how could we pull that biomass into a more useful kind of outcome and help reduce the unit cost of doing that work? So we're looking at sort of a reporting output that helps counties, other sort of local-based groups build an argument to say invest in a biomass facility here, because over the next X decades we're going to be removing this biomass on this frequency to achieve this wildfire resilience, and therefore, which it's a complex sort of super hard problem, but you can see that future state. But how do we get that investment to build those facilities to get there? We think we have that visibility of people planning that work and the data around the work that needs to be done that can help sort of create a sort of data-based argument to encourage that investment. But it's hard.
Yeah, I'll take a whack at it too. I think if anyone has solutions to the biomass market question, they're one of the more important people at Climate Week. I'll just say that. But so American Forests worked with CAL FIRE to produce a report. We were using the Canadian carbon budget model to model out different scenarios for forest resilience treatments, for including biomass utilization, wood product markets. We looked at the million-acre strategy in the state and included that as one of our scenarios. And we had some economic modeling that went into this. And one of our conclusions from that whole big mega study was we need to increase the mill capacity for merchantable saw logs by more than double in the state of California. And we need to more than quadruple the biomass utilization capacity. So that's the scalar change with regards to our forest health and resilience challenges that we're facing. And, this is, I don't know how to do that, right? But there's a lot of people, a lot of financial institutions, a lot of people want to invest in climate change resilience that can help us with that question. But I think collectively, us as a community, conveying the scale, not just of the challenge, but of the solution and the opportunity, and what that investment means for communities. I think that has worked for us in other spheres. It certainly worked for renewable energy. I think we have some opportunity around that, right? What are the opportunities, not just in terms of carbon reductions and climate change, but jobs, right? So that, when you think about the restoration economy, the restoration industry, I think that's where we can start.
All right. First of all, round of applause for our panelists and also for you all for sticking it out and asking wonderful questions. Appreciate all of you. A couple of key themes I just want to summarize. One, increasing the pace and scale of reforestation seems to be a key focus among all of us. Two, I think there's that circularity of the pre-fire, the post-fire is the pre-fire, right? And we have fuel management problems, whether we're talking on the pre-side or the post-side. And that integration and the ability to collaborate on coming up with innovative ways to solve those problems on both sides of the black are going to be really important moving forward. I think the other piece that I continue to hear is just the collaboration and integration, right? We have so many different ways that all of this work is coming to the fore. So how do we step together as a community to move this forward in a meaningful way? I think you've heard all of us talk about the fact that we're really open to collaborating and hearing from each and every one of you. So if you have thoughts, have ideas, please come talk to us after we conclude. I know all of us up here would be really excited to continue conversations with each and every one of you. And to Reed's point, also just creating that collaborative culture, creating a culture of reforestation, creating a culture of collaboration and of that increase of pace and scale. Just kind of thinking about how we do that intentionally, creatively, and with a mind towards wildfire and climate resilient forests of the future, I think we'll be in a good place. So thanks to each and every one of you. Really appreciate your time being here. Thanks to Doris Duke for hosting. This has been really fantastic and look forward to working with all of you in the future. Thanks all.